Yeah, it's good.
All right, cool, thank you. Okay, so first of all, it's with a little trepidation that I give you guys this talk this early in the year. This is the earliest I've ever given it. I've been doing this for at least a dozen years or so, but I usually wait till about the halfway point in the year. And the reason why is because the things I'm going to tell you today are really just, well, they're things that can be taken in different light depending on who says them and in what context and so on. And so I like to wait a little longer in the year usually to make sure that I've had time to establish a relationship enough with my students that there's a mutual respect and trust. And in doing it earlier in the year, I kind of run the risk of that not being there. And if that's not there, then it's possible that some of the things I say kind of get taken in the wrong way. And so I do that with a little bit of risk. Let's put it that way. The reason why I'm doing it so early in the year this year is just because I've had students tell me before, you know, I would have thought of you or your class differently had I known more about you before the class or earlier on in the class. And so there are kind of those two things that are going against one another in my mind. And I just decided, especially with the other things we've been doing in class lately and some of the other ways in which I've been trying to challenge you to think about some of the bigger questions in life. And we did this scale animation the other day in which I think there's an element to it, even though it's something that's strictly a scientific or a mathematical look at the universe. There's something about it that lends itself to asking about life's big questions. And so that's really what the talk is. The talk is really just my opinions about life. And I want you to know ahead of time that I do that also with a little bit of trepidation because I don't feel as though I know everything, and I hope it doesn't come across that way. The reason why I started doing this in the first place is because I felt as though there were a lot of voices speaking to the lives of my students, and some of them very well-meaning, but oftentimes voices that were either not wise or were disingenuous, and I wanted to be able to say what I wanted to say. And so I began kind of composing my thoughts, and eventually it became this. And so that's all this is. This is just my opinions, and I want you to take them as just that, just one person's opinions among many others. And so if you feel as though what I say rings true to you, then accept it as it rings true to you. If you feel as though it doesn't sound right, or I don't think he knows what he's talking about, then just disregard it altogether. You won't hurt my feelings in the least. Just take what you can out of it, and you're welcome to eschew the rest. So there's additionally, this is a difficult time for me to give this talk, and I'm going through some very difficult things in my personal life right now that have caused me to reevaluate the way that I think about these same kinds of things. And so even as I give you some challenges today for some things that I encourage you to think about, maybe deeper or maybe for the first time, but deeper hopefully than you have before, understand that I am also processing through all of those things right now. And so, I don't know how it'll go. We'll just have to wait and see. But it's my hope that some of this is something that will benefit you. And if I get a little emotional, I always get a little emotional when I give a talk, but this time I might get more emotional than usual. First of all, a little bit about my background as far as why I am the kind of person that I am. So I have a personality with my students often that I think is, well, sometimes students don't understand it, sometimes they do. But I kind of embrace the role of the anti-teacher a little bit. You know, I kind of do and say a lot of things that teachers aren't supposed to do and say. And some of that I do just because I think it's funny. And some of it I do because I'm really trying to actually be a little shocking and to be a little bit confrontational, and to make people really, to snap them to attention and ask them some hard questions. And so I hope that this is a class that puts some hard questions to you and makes you think about things that are difficult to think about or uncomfortable to think about. That's one of the reasons why I'm a teacher in the first place. A lot of people become teachers because they were such good students and loved school so much that they never wanted school to end for them. And so they just wanted to do it forever. And that's why they're teachers. And that's perfectly fine. That's not my experience at all. In fact, I was not a terribly good student. I was a bit of a reluctant student, a bit of a slacker, a bit mouthy. I was not the favorite student of my teachers, for sure. In fact, in some ways, I look at my own teaching profession as my having to do my penance for all of the stuff I put my own teachers through. And so, students often think I'm very hard on my students. I give a lot of detentions and things like that. I can tell you that I give, let's put it this way, I probably got more detentions in 1 year than all of you get combined in your entire academic careers. So I got in a lot of trouble at times with my teachers and in school, and so that just is what it is. But I don't come to the teaching profession as somebody who was such a model student that they never wanted to stop doing school. So one of the things I want to do as a teacher then is I want to try to speak to people who are a little like me, and that's not everybody, but I want to be the kind of voice in the lives of my students that a few people were in my life when I was going through a difficult time in school. So we asked this question yesterday, or the last time when we were talking about the scale animation. This was something that Zoe put so eloquently. Why bother with anything? Why do you do anything that you do? And it's such an important question to ask. And so if you can ask yourself that question and answer it well, then I think you're going a long way to figuring out what life is really all about. And so what is it all about? A little bit more about my background. I was a model student through my elementary school years, and I was reasonably bright and did the things I was supposed to do, and got good grades and all the rest. And then when I got into 6th grade, I just started getting mixed up with some people who weren't particularly good influences on me, and I wasn't a particularly good influence on them, if I'm being totally honest. And I started doing a lot of things I shouldn't be doing. I started really doing badly in school, getting involved in some things that I shouldn't have been involved with. And long story short, just in terms of the academics, leaving the other things aside, by the time I was done with my 6th grade year, I was almost failing out of school. And I was getting into a lot of trouble outside of school as well. And my parents were very wise. And there were always people who let me try things. That's one of the things I really value in my parents, and I think really is lacking in a lot of modern parenting. There's a lot of parenting out of fear of what will happen to people. A lot of parenting out of this sense of safety as being priority number one. That was certainly not the case with my parents. They would let me try things and fail over and over again. But they were always there in a way to support me as well, and I have a great deal of respect for my parents. But they recognized that things were not going well for me in school, and so they decided to move me to a private school. This was not because they were super wealthy and had a lot of money to throw at my education, but just because they were willing to make the sacrifices they needed to help me. And so I'm deeply grateful for that. At the time, I didn't want to do that. I was perfectly content to be slipping through the cracks and didn't really care much for my own future. And so they sent me to this private school, and the private school was not like a fancy New England private school. It was a rural, very small rural Baptist school. Very strict rules for behavior and what you could wear and all kinds of things, how you could speak, all sorts of things. Just the kind of place that I was bound to get into a lot of trouble. And so I went there kind of reluctantly, and it was not an easy adjustment for me because, like I said, I got into a lot of trouble. And but they were consistent with their expectations, and that struck me. And what was interesting was there were a couple of teachers, and I've never told them this before, but there were a couple of teachers there that cared enough about me not to accept me for who I was. And I thought that was really interesting. And it wasn't that they were jerks to me or something. And then, I mean, in some sense, maybe I felt that way at the time, but it was really that they saw more in me than I saw in myself, and they weren't willing to accept me for who I was. So they had higher expectations for me than I had for myself. And that's something that really resonated with me. And it was something that I didn't immediately gravitate toward. It took a long time for me to begin to transition to a point where I started to actually have those same kinds of high expectations for myself. Eventually that happened for me, but it took some time, and I didn't even really know that it was happening. And it was hard for me until I looked back later to realize what an impact those people had in my life. But to have somebody who had higher expectations for me than I had for myself, that was really, really important to me. And so one of the things I try to do for my students is to have high expectations, academically, behaviorally, in terms of their character. I hope that comes across, and I hope it doesn't come across in the wrong way. But it's something that I hope that every student who leaves my classroom can say, and that is that Mr. Davis expected a lot out of me. Whether or not I met the expectations, he expected a lot out of me. And that's because he believed that I could do those things. Not because he was trying to make me fail, but he believed that I could do these things even when I didn't believe that I could do them myself. And so I want you to feel as though you've done something hard. By the time you leave my class, I hope that you won't say, well, that was just a really cupcake class. I didn't really have to try very hard in there. I hope that you had to try harder. At least I hope you had to think hard about difficult things. That was important to me, to have teachers who cared enough to expect more out of me than I expected out of myself. Before I went to that school, actually, as I was finishing my 6th grade year and not doing terribly well at it, an uncle of mine, I have a lot of uncles, an uncle of mine came to talk to me. He's a successful businessman and really, really sharp person, somebody I deeply respect. I think my mother put him up to it, but I'm not sure. I never asked her, but I think she put him up to it. He was visiting, and he pulled me aside and said, so how are things going in school and stuff? And so I just kind of blew him off, but he persisted, and he said, well, he said, how did you do in your classes this year? What were your grades? And so, it was an F in this, and it was a D in that, and it was a D in this, and he just goes through them, and he's like, I see you got an F in this, you got a D in this, you got a D in this, you got a C in this. And smart ass that I was, I said to him when he said, you got a C in this, I said, well, the C is average. And I'll never forget what he said to me. He just said, is that what you want to be? You want to be average? And at the time, I probably just blew him off. I don't know what I said. That was when I was, 11 years old or something, and I still remember it today. And I don't want you to get the wrong idea. I don't think there's anything wrong with average. If we're going to be completely honest with ourselves, we're going to find that we're average in some things, we're below average in others, and we're above average in others. And if we're fortunate, we'll be above average in more things than we're below average. But that's not true of everybody all the time. We're not all above average. It's impossible. We like to tell ourselves that. We even like to tell other people that. And it's just not true. But it's also a pretty weak thing to aspire to, isn't it? It's kind of pathetic to say that's what I'm striving for. Like, you're striving for average? Really? It certainly struck me. I decided at some point I didn't want to be average. So, one of the things that I try to do for my students is provide them opportunities to succeed and to fail. And and one of the things we'll talk about later is there is no true success without also the risk of failure. And so all you can be asked to do by a teacher who really wants to give you opportunities is that they give you an opportunity and that they challenge you to do more than you thought you could, and that they help you only when you need to be helped. And that's what I try to do for my students. And if I can do that, then I consider myself to have succeeded. But I can't succeed for them. I can want them to succeed all I want, but it doesn't make them a success. That's something you have to want for yourself. Let's talk a little bit about privilege. It's a term that gets thrown around a lot in political spheres. It's highly loaded. What does it mean to have privilege? And what I'd like to challenge you with is the notion that all of you have a great deal of privilege. It doesn't matter what your skin color is. It does not matter how rich or poor your family is. It does not matter whether you come from an abused background or whether you have caring parents or whether they're divorced or whether they're married. It doesn't make any difference. You have a tremendous amount of privilege just by virtue of being in this room. You are the 1%. By virtue of being here in the United States, you have available to you opportunities that very few people in the history of the world have ever had. There are people who would risk their lives to try to have a fraction of the opportunities that you have. There are people who do and are currently risking their lives to have a fraction of the opportunity that you have. And so the first question I'd like you to write down is, what am I doing with the opportunities I've been given? You're welcome to write down anything you'd like, but I'm going to ask you to write down a few things. What am I doing with the opportunities I've been given? If you don't believe me that you're one of the very privileged few, just take a week and go to some third world country. Don't go to some tourist trap. I mean, go to some place where there are actually real people living real lives and see the way they live. And convince yourself that you have opportunities that are not just more than what they have, but on a completely different plane than what the vast majority of people on our planet currently have. And if you can convince yourself of that, then it starts to open your eyes to the need for you to take advantage of that opportunity. If you have the opportunity that only a tiny fraction of people have, and you don't take it and do something with it, then shame on you. It's important to set goals for your life. I even had you guys set some goals for this school year at the beginning of the year. And it's instructive to look back, and maybe we will here shortly, and just ask, so how are we doing on those academic goals? Those might be little goals, but it's important to have goals. As soon as you sit down to try to make some goals, though, the first thing you ask is, well, which goals are important? Right? I mean, you don't want to have stupid goals, you want to have good goals. So what goals are important? It's hard to answer that question, but let me at least give you, I'm going to give you some possible ways to think about answering that question today. The first thing I want to challenge you with is the notion that your goals will not always be the same. That the goals you have today as a 16, 17-year-old American high school student might not be the same goals you always have. In fact, they're almost certain to change. They're almost certain to change in pretty significant ways. The things that you care about will change. Whether you succeed or don't succeed in achieving the goals that you have today, it's probably not all that important, honestly. It depends on what they are. But if I think back to in my own life about the kinds of goals that I had when I was a teenager, they were really teenager-y kinds of goals. And I don't say that in a derogatory sense because, you are what you are. It's not like you can be something you're not. But when I look back on my own goals, just looking at myself, I have to say, wow, what a bunch of self-absorbed, meaningless goals I had. Like, for example, I wanted to be a professional hockey player at some point in time. Okay, well, that's nice. I wanted to be a professional musician at some point. At some point, I wanted to actually be a professional artist. I make jewelry art, and I'm actually quite good at it. And so I thought, wouldn't that be a cool profession? And as I think about those kinds of things, I think to myself now, well, not that those things are terrible things necessarily, although they could actually be terrible things. Ask somebody who's a professional athlete or who's a professional musician or something like that. Ask them how easy it really is to live the life that they live, and ask them how fulfilling it truly is, and how much they like what they do. And I think you'll find that they will likely tell you that even if they've reached the pinnacle of success in those areas, they still find it hollow. And I know that's true in my own life, in the small measure in which I have succeeded in achieving those kinds of personal goals. I've achieved, for example, a level of fame among a very small subset of people. And by fame, I simply mean that there are people who know me that I don't know. And there's something kind of flattering about that, right? When someone comes up and says, oh, I know all about you. You don't even know who they are. There's something kind of flattering about that. There's also something kind of creepy about that, by the way. It's like, well, I don't even know who you are. Like, it's weird that you know a lot about me. But I can also tell you that in as much as I've succeeded or failed at any of those goals, regardless of the success or failure, those goals have all just kind of washed away in comparison to more important things. So I just want to challenge you with the idea that your goals might change in significant ways as you get older. If I ask myself now, at the age of 45, what kinds of goals are really important to me? At the end of the day, when I sit down and I think to myself, how did I do today on achieving my goals? What kinds of measures do I use to decide? And if I have to boil it down to 3 questions, these are the 3 questions I ask myself. The first one is, am I a good husband? That matters to me a lot. Am I a good father? Do I do my job well? Those are the things that matter. None of those were important to me when I was 17. They're pretty important to me now. Now you might look at those goals and say, well, those aren't really any goals at all. Like, you don't have to achieve anything great to be a good father or to be a good husband or do a good job at your job. No, I suppose they're not great goals in the sense that they're not world-changing goals, or at least they don't change the larger world. But they're pretty important in my world. They're pretty important in the world of my children and my wife, my students. So I might not be curing cancer or playing in the Super Bowl or something like that, but I wouldn't say that those goals are any less worthy. In fact, in a lot of ways, they're a lot more worthy. The bad news is they're really hard. It's very hard to be a good husband, or a good wife, good father, good mother. Those things are extremely difficult. Life is a grind. So when you've been married for 20 years, like, what does it look like then? You guys are all kids. Your relationship with your parents is probably kind of complicated, isn't it? You could probably point to a dozen flaws in both your parents just off the top of your head. A lot lot of ways in which they've maybe failed you, or you could have had a better upbringing, or what have you. It's not easy, but it is a worthy goal. So, if I'm honest with myself, there are a lot of times when I have to say, I wasn't such a good husband today. Man, I was lousy with my kids. Maybe I just did a crappy job at my job today. A lot of days when I'd have to say that. So it's hard. But that's part of what makes those goals worthy goals. If they were too easy, it wouldn't be very good goals. So that's the bad news, that it's hard to do those kinds of things. Here's the good news. The good news is that every one of those goals is completely achievable by everybody. You don't have to be athletic or smart. You don't have to be wealthy. You don't have to have any particular, anything special about you, no particular station in life. It makes no difference. Any person could be a good husband, wife, father, mother, could do a good job at their job. Anybody could do those things. Those are goals that are accessible to everybody. You know, I mean, I'm not 7 feet tall and I can't jump real high. I can't play in the NBA. But I could be a good father if I put my mind to it. If I really cared about that, I could do that. And that's good news. When a goal takes prominence in your life, what it means is that you are willing to sacrifice other things in order for you to achieve that thing, right? That's what it means for it to be a goal. So you have to ask yourself, what am I willing to sacrifice something for? If I'm not willing to sacrifice for it, then is it even really a goal in the first place? I asked you guys to make some academic goals for this class. Was it really a goal? By this point in time, you should be able to answer that question. You know, we're 12 weeks into the school year. How have you been doing with that goal? Have you been sacrificing what you need to make it a reality? If not, it was never a goal in the first place. At least not a real one. It might have been a wish, might have been a dream, might have been a hope, but was it a goal? Were you actually working toward it? Because if you have a goal, you're willing to work toward it. And that means sacrificing things. So a good way of thinking about your life is that your entire life is one big sacrifice. Moment by moment, day by day, you are giving yourself to something. And so the question is, what are you giving yourself to? Day in, day out. Your actions will tell you, by the way. Flowery language won't tell you. Your actions will tell you what you are willing to sacrifice yourself to. Your only choice is how it's spent. But you are sacrificing your life whether you like to or not. It slips away from us all a little bit at a time, and you don't know how much you have left. I don't say this because it makes me proud or happy, but I've outlived many of my students. When you're 17, you think you're going to live forever. You don't know. You might not be here tomorrow. I might not be here tomorrow. A lot of people think that being an adult means to be able to take care of yourself. That's probably what you guys are, at least if you haven't said it out loud, it's probably the assumption you're operating under when you think about your transition into adulthood. It's like, I know I got a lot of challenges coming up in the coming years. You know, within like 2-3 years, maybe 5 years, something like that, eventually I'm going to have to really take care of myself. And that's when I'll be an adult. You're not an adult when you can take care of yourself. I got an 11-year-old that can take care of himself. It's actually not that hard to take care of yourself. You're not a real adult unless you can take care of somebody else. That's hard. Somebody else's entire life is dependent on you. You'll know you're an adult then. Along those lines, I want to say something specifically to the young men who are here, because this is something I just put into the talk. I always put new things into it. I change it every time I give it, but this is something that has just been resonating in my mind over the course of the last couple of years. I just see, and I don't want this to sound, apocalyptic or, pessimistic in the extreme, but I just see a generation of boys that are just lost, and it pains me to see. Boys that don't know what it means to be a man, or maybe even scared to become a man. Maybe they've been told that being a man isn't even all that great a thing. Or maybe you shouldn't be one. I think some of the reason why this doesn't affect girls as much as it does boys in our modern society is because girls intuitively know that the world is a dangerous place. And the reason is it's a more dangerous place for women than it is for men. A lot more bad things can happen to women in the world than can happen to men in the world. The most obvious one is pregnancy. Not to say pregnancy is a bad thing. I hope that didn't come across that way. But it's a dangerous thing. Pregnancy is a dangerous thing. You become very vulnerable. And not only do you become very vulnerable, but if you succeed in the pregnancy, then you have a dependent child that you have to take care of. That's a huge responsibility. I think women are just more equipped to deal with that potential reality than men are. Because, honestly, how much of that responsibility falls on men by virtue of their being a man? Really, it's whether they choose or not for that to be an inconvenience to them, whether they take that responsibility on. But it's not a choice for a woman. It's a fact and a reality of life. And so the fact that they can become pregnant, among many other bad things that could happen to women, the fact that they could become pregnant and vulnerable in that pregnancy and beyond is something that causes them to approach the adult life with greater seriousness. They understand that there is danger lurking and they prepare themselves better. The world is a dangerous place. You might not even know what the dangers are. Sometimes they're pretty subtle and insidious. But I see an increasing number of young men who are really just little boys in adults' bodies. And that's a terrible thing. A 3-year-old in a 3-year-old's body is a perfectly natural, normal, and wonderful thing. A 3-year-old in an 18-year-old's body is not wonderful. It's toxic and pathological. And it's very dangerous because someone in an adult male body can do a hell of a lot of damage to people, especially if they don't know how to be in control of an adult male body. And so, young men have to become men. That's a part of what they have to do. And it's not just something you have to do, it's something that is needed by everyone for you to do. It's just as important for girls as it is for boys that boys become real men, capable of taking responsibility and doing great things and providing for people. Why is that so important? Well, let me ask you the question. As a girl, do you want to have a useless man? Nobody wants a useless man, because a useless man is useless. Do you want to have a man who's just another child in an adult body? Hell no. Nobody wants that. It's not good for anybody. So I put that challenge specifically to young men, to be somebody who's willing to take hold of the great responsibility of being a man. And it is a great responsibility. To take hold of that responsibility and instead of avoiding it, to grab a hold of it and to take it as a challenge. And it is a challenge. And you're worthy of it. And it's worthy of you. encourage you to take on great challenges, things that you don't even think you can do. The more difficult the challenge, the more meaningful it becomes. About 10 years ago, my wife and I began a process of adoption. We finally completed it about a year and a half ago. I went from 2 biological children to 5 children, 3 of whom are not mine biologically. Children put up for adoption are not children that don't have problems. And I have children with some pretty big problems. Through no fault of their own. But they're still their problems. You can be someone who is abused and live your whole life as a victim, or you can choose to say, I didn't choose the things that happened to me, but I can choose how to live my life after those things that happened to me. Adopting these children is the hardest thing I've ever done. And it's the most meaningful thing I've ever done. As I'm going through some difficult things in my personal life, one of the things that has become clear to me is that when you take on the most meaningful burden that you can, the most meaningful thing that you can conceive, that suddenly you're capable of doing everything that needs to be done. My ability to withstand chaos, not to withstand, my ability to triumph over chaos in my life has become infinite. There is nothing that I cannot do. And I mean, I have limitations, okay? I'm not trying to say, some ridiculous thing about, just reach for your dreams or something like that. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying my ability to handle whatever life sends my way has become infinite. I've been going through some things just in the last couple months. Eventually I shared them with a couple of my colleagues, and one of my colleagues the other day just said to me, I don't know how you can function. I don't know how you can come to work and do your job. I would just be a complete mess. I don't think I could get out of bed in the morning. And it just seemed like such a strange thing for someone to tell me, because my experience is completely the opposite. I've never been stronger. I've never faced things with more conviction. And when you face things with conviction that what you're doing is the right thing, there is nothing that you cannot face. You just do it. And so one of the challenges I have for you is find the most worthy burden. A burden you'd be privileged to carry. And then pick it up and carry it. See what happens. Find the heaviest thing you can carry and try to carry it and see what happens. It's pretty awesome. So what we're really talking about here, if you think about all of the things that I've been telling you about so far, what we're really talking about is how do you develop an identity? How do you figure out who you are? And that's one of the main tasks of being a teenager like yourselves. You're the product of your parents, the product of your upbringing. You have somebody else's genetic material, a mishmash of it inside of you. But how do you become you? Like, what does it even mean to be you? That's part of what you're figuring out, right? So how do you develop an identity for yourself? Well, I mean, there's no formula that you can use. It's not like, there's some magic way that you figure out who you are, but I'll at least give you some ways that you can, some methods of trying to figure that kind of stuff out. And again, just see what resonates with you. So first thing you have to do is cast a vision. You have to figure out where you want to go, right? Because part of who you are is going to be determined by what it is you aim at. And so what are you aiming at? If I asked you these, let me give you 3 questions that you could answer for yourself in sequential order. I'll get to the sequence at the end, but right now let me just ask it this way. So the first question is this: where would you like to see yourself in 5 years? So go ahead and write that one down. That's a good one to ask yourself. Where would you like to see yourself in 5 years? I 5 years is a pretty reasonable amount of time. If you ask a typical 17-year-old, where would you like to see yourself in 5 years? They'd probably be able to answer that question with some degree of clarity. But mostly what they're really doing is saying what the default they think would be. They haven't really stopped and thought about it that much, probably. But what kinds of things would you say? You might say stuff like, well, I'll probably be, I'm envisioning that I'll have graduated high school, I'll have gone to the college that I want to go to, maybe I'll be close to finishing college, maybe I will have just finished it, maybe I will have already been in the workforce for several years. I don't know where you see yourself in 5 years, but I do know that it's quite possible that you end up getting derailed just in the next 5 years. That 5 years from now, you won't be where you think you'll be. You know how I know that? Because of how many people drop out of college. See, because most of you here would say you're going to college, but some of you will not finish college. That's the reality of it. And part of the reason you won't finish is because you're not prepared for it. Part of the reason you're not prepared for it is people haven't made things hard enough for you yet. And so you're not as well developed and mature as you should be. That's a problem. And you'll find out the hard way that that's the case if you don't already know. You probably have a sense of it already, if that's you. I can't tell you how many students I bump into. I don't go shopping much, but it seems like every time I go to a store, there's one of my students in the cashier's line. And it's like, okay, so they're a cashier. That's fine if that's what you're using to pay your way through school. But that's not what your plan A was. You weren't intending to stay there forever, I hope. And there's nothing wrong with being a cashier. Please don't get me wrong. But it's nothing to aspire to either. Not with the level of opportunity that you've had thrown your way. It's nothing to aspire to. Some of you might even have kids in the next 5 years. Boy, won't that be a shock. Or maybe not. Maybe it's something you wanted. I've had students who have wanted to get married and have children that quick. Great. But was it something that happened to you when you were least expecting it? Or was it something that was part of your plan? That's kind of important. So where would you like to see yourself in 5 years? Next question's tougher. Here's question number 2. Where would you like to see yourself in 25 years? Oh, 25 years, heck, you'll be my age. Not quite. Close. You'll be middle-aged. And that might seem so far off. It's so hard to internalize that when you're 17 years old. You guys' bodies are getting bigger and stronger. Your minds are getting stronger. You have the whole world before you. You have all sorts of grandiose ideas of what you're going to do. It's like nobody wants to think about middle age, right? My body's not getting stronger anymore. It's getting weaker. It's breaking down. My mind isn't as sharp as it used to be. It's getting weaker. I don't have as much flexibility in my life anymore. I can't just go and do whatever I want. I'm strapped down by responsibilities. And by the way, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Again, that's a burden I welcome. And any burden you welcome is no real burden at all. It's just something you're privileged to carry, as I said before. And so, but who wants to think of middle age? Guys, it comes at you in a flash. Let me give you something to think about. The people that are the most important people in your life, especially your friends, your peers, they will disappear so quickly after high school. You'll be fortunate if one or two of them remain friends with you for even a short period of time. Eventually, you might not have any of them as friends anymore. Maybe again, one or two, but not very many. You'll move into other phases of your life. That sounds very sad, but it's not sad. It just means you're starting other chapters, and when you start one chapter, you have to close the previous one, and it's just the way that it goes. And so, life is a series of things opening and closing, and for everything that opens, something else closes. And so that's just the nature of life. You just have to accept that as part of the deal. But here's the thing that you really have to think about. The people that are the most important people in your life 25 years from now are almost certainly people that you have never met before. And, in some cases, people that don't even exist. And you can't even conceptualize these people because they don't exist. But at some point in time, they will become the most important people in your lives. You would do anything for them. And the decisions that you make now affect them in the future. So think about that. Things that you do now affect them. Last question. Where would you like to see yourself in 5 years? Where would you like to see yourself in 25 years? Where would you like to see yourself in 100 years? Where would you like to see yourself in 100 years? And if you're a very optimistic person, you'd say, well, maybe alive. That would be great, right? Well, barring advancements in medical technology and a heck of a lot of luck, we're all going to be dead in 100 years. So what I'm really asking with that question is not, where do you really expect to see yourself in 100 years? It's, what do you want your legacy to be? When you are dead and gone, will anyone even care or remember that you were here? What do you want your legacy to be? One of the things I really like about being a teacher is the legacy that I'm allowed to leave. It's no guarantee, there's no guarantee, but I at least have the opportunity to leave a legacy that's pretty special. When I walk out that door for the last time, whether it's today, whether it's in 30 years, I will take nothing with me. Nothing. I'll leave behind an empty classroom. An architect could point to buildings that they designed. A musician could say, hey, here's some music that I made. I will have nothing when I walk out the door. But I have the opportunity, having interacted with thousands of students, to have left a little piece of myself in each one of them. I have that opportunity. And that means I have the opportunity to leave a living legacy. A little piece of myself that lives on after I'm gone. lives of my students, in the lives of my children, in the lives of their children. So what kind of a legacy do you want to leave? That's a pretty darn important question to ask. If you think about it, it's the most important question to ask. It's the only one that matters until you've answered it. And only then can any other questions even be asked. And so, this would be a good exercise for you. I'm going to give you guys some informal homework assignments after the talk. The first one I'm going to give you is to consider those 3 questions. You open your room, find some quiet place where you'll be undisturbed. Shut off any electronic distractions. Just get out a piece of paper and a pencil. Just you and your brain and a piece of paper and a pencil. Try to answer those 3 questions. Starting with the last one. And then working back to the first one. Think about that. If you have a clear sense of what you want your legacy to be, think about how much clearer you could answer the question of where you see yourself in 25 years. And if you have a clear answer to what you want your legacy to be, how easy it will be for you to come up with real, substantive goals for the next 5 years. But until you've answered that question, you're just wandering. So that's one way you can develop your identity. Part of your identity is what you're aiming for. And if you know what you're aiming for, then it's really easy to do the right things. Well, it's not easy, but it's easier than if you're just wandering around. So cast a vision for yourself. The second part of that then is the idea of sacrifice. What are you willing to sacrifice to achieve those goals? What disciplines must you develop? What kinds, if you're going to go down this road, it means that you're sacrificing all the other ones you could go down. So which ones are you willing not to go down? You have to decide that. What practical steps are you going to take to make your goals a reality? What resolutions will you make? What convictions will you have? Will you be a person of conviction? Or will you just wander through life? It'll happen to you one way or another. Life has a funny way of happening, whether you pay attention to it or not. I'm just encouraging you to pay attention to it. So, how do you develop an identity? One of the ways is by having a vision, having something clear that you're aiming at. Another way is to have practical steps that you're taking in order to help you make that vision a reality. A third thing you need to do is prepare for moments of great risk. Life comes at you with lots of little risks, and then every now and then really big risks will rear their heads. And a lot of people don't pay any attention to them until they come, and they don't know what to do. You know, if you're snuck up on by life's biggest risks, you know, it's like life is a series of muggings, you know, and if you're not prepared for the muggers, then, you know, things go very badly for you when it happens, right? So what are the moments of great risk in life? Just off the top of my head, I jotted down a few, and you could add to this list, I'm sure, many, many times over. These are some big ones. So the first one, deciding whether to take an unpopular stand or to shrink back. Are you someone who stands on convictions and is willing to stand up for those convictions? Or are you somebody who will shrink back when the moment arises? That's something you decide before the moment ever comes. Deciding whether to ask out that boy or girl you have a crush on, that's a moment of great risk that can change the course of your life. Deciding what to study in college or whether to even go to college. Deciding when or whether to try alcohol, drugs, gambling, sex, pornography, anything else that's potentially risky or addictive. Moments of great risk. Have you thought about those things ahead of time? Or are they just going to happen to you in the course of time? Having a really important job interview or tryout or audition, putting yourself out there to be judged by others, that's a moment of great risk. Deciding whether to quit your job and start something new. Deciding whether to go into credit card debt to afford something, that's a moment of great risk. Deciding if this is the person you want to be the mother or father of your children, that's a pretty big risk. buying your first house, deciding how to raise your children, moments of great risk. Life will bring them to you. So are you going to be somebody who's prepared for those moments? Have you thought about what's going to happen when those moments come? Are you going to make decisions with conviction? Or are you just going to kind of let it all happen as it does and see where the cards fall? Make no mistake, those decisions will get made, whether you take an active part in making them or not. Remember that courage is merely, it's not being courageous does not mean you have to be like a naturally brave person. To be courageous means you have the conviction to do the right thing even when the right thing is not the convenient thing to do. That's what I mean by being a person of conviction. Then it's not hard to be courageous when you're a person of conviction. You just do the right thing. And to hell with the consequences. Life comes with success and failure, but the only way you can get either success or failure is by risking. You cannot have true success without the risk of failure. You cannot have failure without the potential for success. The two go hand in hand. And if you risk a lot, you're going to fail sometimes and you're just going to succeed sometimes, but you're going to succeed and fail more than the person who never tries. So you have to be willing to ask yourself, what am I willing to risk? What kinds of things am I willing to risk? And then what defines you as a person, if you're thinking again about your identity, what defines you as a person are the risks that you take and how you respond when you succeed or fail. What kind of a successful person are you? What kind of a failure are you when you fail? How you respond in those moments will define you. You are not special. That is something that is really important to tell yourself. Maybe something you should tell yourself in the mirror every morning after you wake up. You are not special. But you are unique. You are the only you that there is. In the words of Dr. Seuss, there's no one on earth who is youer than you. So you are unique, but you are not special. Life does not owe you anything. If anything, you've already been granted, as we said before, far more than life ever owed you, far more than you deserved. The opportunities you have, the affluence that you have, was worked for by someone else. You didn't do it. In my case, in fact, for most Americans, we could point to 2 to 3 generations back. My grandparents' generation, maybe your great-grandparents' generation. They lived in the Depression. They fought World War II. They rebuilt their nation after World War II. They made many of the most spectacular engineering achievements ever made in human history happen. That was some generation, man. My grandfather and grandmother didn't have more than a high school education. My grandfather couldn't get past the 8th grade because he had to go to work when he was like 13 years old. Went off and fought in World War II. Came back. The two of them worked night shifts in a parts factory making machine parts. That's not glamorous. They worked hard enough that both their children could go to college. That's pretty amazing. And now there's me. I had lots of opportunities available to me. And I can thank my grandparents for that. Because without them doing what they did, I wouldn't have what I have. And so remember that. When you accept the opportunities that you have, take hold of them, you're honoring those who have made it possible for you to have those opportunities. But you are not special. You're just fortunate. Along with that, success and failure, I told you that they require risk, right? And that means that you can't inherit them. You can't inherit success. You can't inherit failure from your parents. So, your mom might be a brain surgeon. You don't get to inherit that. You have to work yourself for it if you want it. Let's say your father was an abusive alcoholic. You don't inherit that. That's something you work for. You choose to do those things, or have those things for yourself, or embrace those things as your identity. You cannot inherit the success or failure of your parents. That's on you. So what kinds of attitudes are the kinds of attitudes of people who succeed in taking on this this most difficult task of living life? Let me give you a few characteristics of a person like that. Some little pieces of advice to what kind of person you might want to be. First of all, be a can-do person, not a can't-do person. People all fall somewhere in a continuum with their attitude about things. And so if you're a can-do person, every time some new challenge comes along, you say, I can do that. You might be wrong, but at least you're starting off on the right foot. If your first knee-jerk reaction say, I can't do that, well, that's what stupid people say. And when I say that, I don't mean they're stupid so they say that. I'm saying they say that and then they become stupid, because you know what? You don't learn much when you have that attitude. You don't grow much when you have that attitude. The next thing you know, you're not very well equipped. So be a can-do person, not a can't-do person. There are a lot of things you'll never be able to achieve, but don't let that be your knee-jerk reaction. Say to yourself, I can do that. Here's another one. Be unoffendable and quick to forgive. We spend a lot of time with social movements trying to make sure that nobody offends anybody. But nobody spends a whole lot of time teaching people how not to be offended. And that's, I think, a really big disservice. Guess what? Newsflash, life is going to offend you in a lot of ways. Get over it. Be somebody who resolves not to be easily offended, and you will find that you are a lot happier in life, and you'll make the other people around you a lot happier too. Going along with that, be somebody who's quick to forgive. When somebody offends you, be quick to forgive them. If you do both those things, if you're hard to offend in the first place and you forgive people easily who offend you, then you'll find yourself with, number one, a very positive view of other people, the ability to work through conflict instead of avoiding it at all costs, and you'll find that you're just overall much happier with what's going on in life. Don't make yourself into a victim. You're not a victim. We already said you're one of the privileged few, so don't act like you're a victim when you're not. It's your choice whether you want to be offended. Someone can give offense, but you have to take it if it's going to affect you. Someone can do something to you, and not forgiving them is a choice that you make. So, regardless of what the responsibility is of the other person, what you can always resolve to do is to be somebody difficult to offend and somebody who forgives easily. Those are choices that you make. Have a proper perspective of time. And I have to be careful, because the words that I said before about, you need to embrace adulthood and take on responsibility and all that kind of stuff, you have to be careful, because you don't want somebody growing up too fast. You are what you are. You're not what you're not. You're not a 3-year-old, but you're also not a 30-year-old. So don't act like either one of those. You are what you are. And so have a proper perspective of time. Don't try to be something that you're not, or somebody that you're not. When you do become an adult, it's so easy to forget this. Try really hard not to forget what it was like to be a kid. I know I told myself that when I was a kid. Oh, why are adults so out of touch? They just don't understand children. How is it possible? They were all children once themselves, weren't they? But I can say now that I am an adult, it's really hard to remember how to be a child. That's one of the great things about having children, by the way, is that they make you remember what it's like to be a child. You have to live through their sense of awe and wonder about the world, your own sense of awe and wonder about the world again. It allows you to become young again. It's also one of the things I like about teaching, is that you guys keep me young, or as young as anybody can manage to keep me, I suppose. Another thing that you need to try to do, and this is difficult in the modern age, but try to live in the real world as much as possible. That doesn't mean be like a technophobe who never, touches a laptop or a cell phone or something. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying if you invest yourself in a fantasy world, eventually you'll be reducible to a profile, and you'll find you're not even a real person. If you want to be a real person, that means having real experiences. It means having real relationships with real people. It means the messiness of life has to happen to you. And that can't really happen in a fantasy world because it's not even your world. It's someone else's fantasy world. And so I just encourage you guys to try to resolve to, as much as you can, live in the real world. Career path advice. We'll do this quickly and then we'll be done for the day. I have some educational stuff I want to get to, but that's going to have to wait for another day. So let's at least do the career path advice. So here are 3 things I'd like you to write down. And so I've had students a lot of times ask me the question, like, what should I do with my life? And I have 3 pieces of advice as you try to figure that out, okay? So when you're trying to find out what you want to do for a career, choose something, number 1, that you like to do. Choose something that you like to do. That's very important. If you don't like to do it, you're just being miserable in your job. So choose something you like to do. Notice I didn't say choose something you love to do. There's the old saying, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. Maybe. I've seen people like that before. But let me give you another possibility. Let's say that the thing you like doing most of all in the entire world is, I don't know, painting. I don't know, I just made that up. Okay, let's say you want to be the next Van Gogh. You love to paint, okay? Great. How would you like to do that when someone else is telling you when and how to do it, and you have to do it 40 plus hours a week, whether you like to or not, and it's really hard to pay the bills? Van Gogh was poor, So when you get to do the thing you love to do, but it's made to be done by someone else who's paying you money and stuff like that, suddenly it stops being so much fun. I've had this experience with my artistic endeavors. As I've started selling my work and things like that, it just becomes a drudgery. It's like, oh, I gotta do this now on a timeline. Somebody's making me do this hobby. I used to really enjoy this. Now it's not so fun anymore. You might not want to take the thing you love most in life and turn it into a job. So like, I teach chemistry. It's nice, I like it. It's not the thing I want to do most in the world, but I can make those things hobbies. I can make those things that I do outside of school, and I can still enjoy them on my own terms. You don't have to make the thing you love most into your job. Just be careful about that, because you don't want to take the thing you love most and turn it into a drudgery. That's awful. So do something that you like to do. Number 2, do something you're good at. I mean, don't pick something you're bad at, right? Pick something you're good at. It doesn't matter how much you like it if you're not good at it. And the reason why I say that is a lot of people like to think of lottery careers as their potential careers, right? I mean, think about the ones I mentioned. Professional athlete, professional musician, professional artist. It's like, okay, great. You might be good at it. And that's the worst thing that can happen to you is, by the way, having people tell you how good you are at it. I have people say to me before, man, you are an amazing singer. Like, you should be a professional singer. I've had people tell me that before. And it's like, you have to be wise enough to say, they're lying or they're ignorant and don't know what they're talking about. Because it's just not true. And that would be a really stupid thing for me to do. You have to be wise enough to do that. For everybody who makes it big and becomes, the next Beyonce or something, how many people are toiling away in garage bands and playing in local smoke-filled bars and stuff? They might want to do that, but at that point it's really a hobby, right? That's not really your job. You better have a plan A to go with that plan B, let's put it that way, right? And so, you might even be super talented. It might just be you're not good looking enough. It's like, or you might not be lucky enough to get just the right breaks or whatever. There's so many ways you can fail in what I like to call a lottery career, right? Which is what those things are. Those things are really lottery careers. You're basically investing yourself in something that only a tiny fraction of people really succeed to the highest level in, and then those are the people who are elevated before you as what you should be aspiring to. Oof, that's a dangerous, dangerous game to play. Be careful about lottery careers. Take personality tests or strength finders tests. Find out what you're good at. Find out what you like. Those are the kinds of things you can do free online now. It's so easy to do those kinds of things. And I'll send some things along that you might be able to use along those lines. I'll give you some materials you can work through with that. But figure out what you're good at. So do something you like to do. Do something you're good at. And number 3, do something that's worth something to others. Do something that's worth something to others. Now, there are ways that things can be worth something to others. One really important way is money. Like, if somebody's not willing to pay you to do it, guess what? It's not a career, because that, by definition, is something you get paid for. So you might be really good at it. You might like it. But if nobody pays you for it, well, then it's not a job, right? It's a hobby. Let me give you this, though, as another thing to consider. Whether you make a lot of money at something or not, money is really not the be-all, end-all. Once basic needs are met, people tend to be less happy the more money they make. Did you know that? Once basic needs are met. First, your basic needs have to be met, right? Because if they're not met, well, if you're starving, you're probably not very happy. But once your basic needs are met, the more money you make, the less happy you are. Money's not everything. What I would suggest is that if what you're doing doesn't serve some greater purpose, if it doesn't help people in some substantive way, you're going to find it ultimately hollow and meaningless. So try to find something that does something useful to people. And I don't mean it has to be like, something that solves all their problems in life. I mean, it could be something as simple as being a plumber, being able at the end of the day to say, well, now their sink doesn't leak. Like, that's helping people in a pretty substantive way. Like, that's a pretty gratifying kind of thing to do as a job. So find something that you're good at, that you like to do, and that that's worth something to somebody else. Okay? All right, well, that's all we'll have time for today. Thank you for your attention, guys.